Morning, Noon and Night by Sidney Sheldon. Main characters of the story are Harry Stanford, a business tycoon, Dimitri, Harry's bodyguard, Tyler Stanford, Harry's elder son, Woodrow Stanford, his younger son, Kendall, his daughter, and Julia Stanford, his illegitimate daughter. Harry Stanford is a 6 foot tall man with white hair. His bodyguard Dimitri is a 6 foot 4 inch tall Russian. Harry Stanford believed in his instinct and intuition, which made him the wealthiest man in the world. He considered himself a religious man, and his God wanted him to be rich, successful, and his enemies dead. Harry Stanford was married to Emily Temple and had 3 children, namely Tyler Stanford, Woodrow Stanford, and Kendall. He also had an illegitimate daughter, Julia Stanford, with his children governess, Rosemary Nelson. Coming to the current story, he is currently in a village in France, his secret place, and is being followed by some people, his enemies of course. He is an easy target as he is very recognizable with his pure white German Shepherd and the bodyguard. He suspected that he was being followed by the enemies, and so he created a delusion for them and reached his destination by car instead of his plane. He sent his German Shepherd Prince as a passenger on the plane instead of going himself. He reached his destination Portofino through the sea, calling his banks all over the world, not letting Dimitri know who he was speaking to. He had picked a girl, Sophia, to accompany him on this particular journey. Here, 4 shooters who were waiting for him at Kennedy Airport were shocked when Prince the dog came out of the plane instead of Harry. In Portofino, at dinner, Sophia asked about Harry's life, to which he lied, saying that he's alone and retired. Sophia believed him and said affectionately, "You are alone like me, Caro, but I'm with you." He laughed in his mind. He thought how stupid she is. After dinner, he asked Sophia to go back to the hotel and wait for him. When she left, he told Dimitri that they are leaving the island. To which Dimitri asked about the girl. He replied, "She can go screw herself back home. Her work is done." He continued making calls to his attorney firm in Boston and to his banks all over the world while traveling, discussing something very important. They were leaving by sea. Now, due to bad weather, Captain Vaccaro warned Stanford, but he could not stop. He could not stop as the meeting with Rene in Corsica was going to solve all his problems. He asked Dimitri to arrange a helicopter. When they got off the boat, they couldn't reach Bonifacio. Stanford had been in storms before, but this was one of the worst events that occurred later that night, which was a matter of speculation, of course. Stanford drowned, and Dimitri saw him drawing. When the body was brought, Captain Duror, the police officer of the island, was impatient to get to his mistress. His impulse was to say, "Take that body to some other island." Dimitri, the eyewitness, told the officer that our yacht was caught in the storm last night. It was very bad. He asked me to give him a massage and then to bring him a sleeping pill, which was in the bathroom. When I came back, I saw him standing at the railing, stretching out to catch the papers which were flying. The wind was tossing the yacht. I tried to save him, but it was too late. He fell. We found the body with the help of Vaccaro. Captain Duror was about to grant them a death certificate and an exit visa, but stopped when he knew the victim's name was Harry Stanford. He asked again, "What is it, Stanford?" Durer thought God himself sent him this chance. Stanford's death reverberates and he will be handling the case, which will be in the limelight. He told Vaccaro and Dimitri that it would take at least a week. Who is his next kin? Dimitri said, Rehnquist and Fitzgerald. Rehnquist and Fitzgerald was a legal firm and it was handling all the Stanford's personal affairs. Here in the firm, Steve Solan, an attorney working in the firm, was talking to Simon Fitzgerald. Simon Fitzgerald was telling him about Harry Stanford, like how he snatched his own father's business in his teens and how he is married to Emily Temple and how Emily always tried to close her eyes to his cheating, but one day it got to be too much for her. She hired a governess for her children, Rosemary Nelson. She was so beautiful. Harry had an affair with her and he got her pregnant. She wanted to have abortion, but then Harry promised her that he would marry her. That night, Emily heard their conversation and she committed suicide. The news was everywhere. All three of his children blamed him for their mother's suicide, but they were too young to fight their father. He feared that they would do the same as he did to his father, so he sent them to different boarding schools in different cities. They lived on the little charity that their mother had left. He used his wealth as a carrot and stick approach. Later, Tyler Stanford, his elder son, became a judge in Chicago. Woodrow Stanford, his younger son, didn't do anything but gamble. He got a waitress pregnant and married her. Kendall, his daughter, is a successful fashion designer married to a Frenchman who is 5 years younger than her. Steve listened to the story of Stanford and then headed to the island where Stanford's body was kept. To his surprise, Captain Derod had already released Dimitri and he had left for Australia. Derod was enjoying his fame. Every news story had his face beaming. He was not ready to release Stanford's body until Steve warned him legally. After 3 days of waiting, the plane carrying Stanford's body landed at Logan Airport in Boston, where his 3 children were coming to celebrate their father's death. Tyler Stanford, Harry's elder son, watched the news on TV. As his father's visuals were appearing on the screen, he started remembering the time when he was 14, how his father used to beat his mother, and about the affair with Rosemary. He remembered how one fine day he was woken up by his father saying that his mother had an accident and how he knew that his father had killed her. All 3 said, "I hate father," that day. Tyler was short, slightly overweight, with calculating eyes. He had none of the charm of his father. He was very private man and even his neighbors knew nothing about him. Everyone knew that he had a bitter marriage and is now divorced. After his divorce, Tyler had sworn that he would never be emotionally involved. But then he met Lee. Lee was a handsome man, a successful model with dozens of admirers. Lee liked expensive things. Earlier, Tyler thought running after Lee would be a waste of time. But now, with his father's death, he could be the wealthiest man, and Lee would definitely love it. Basically, Tyler was a gay. His father knew his secret, and so he had forcibly made him marry a random girl that he had bedded once. She had bored him in a few minutes, and so he decided to make her marry his son. She was only looting Tyler, and when he finally left with nothing, she divorced him. Kendall, Harry's daughter, also knew this news from the TV. She was shocked, and she was also remembering how she became such a rich fashion designer from being such a small model. She remembered falling in love with Mark, the Frenchman, who is 5 years younger than her. When she made him meet her father, he exploded and said he is marrying you for money only. Well, she ignored it as she knew Mark loved her and proceeded to marry him. Before the news of her father, she had received a blackmail letter asking for immediate money. The letter was frequent. Actually, one day she had gone out for a friend's birthday party. While driving back, she was drunk and a woman came in front of the car. She was picking flowers. It was an accident. The woman died instantly and Kendall couldn't help her, so she ran. She came back home and told everything to Mark, her husband. And it was then that Mark had this idea of blackmailing her. It was Mark who was blackmailing his wife and extorting money from her, but she didn't know it. Julia Stanford, the illegitimate child of Harry, was now 26 years old and working for an agency, hiding her identity, of course. In her childhood, Julia was told that her father was not alive, but one day when Julia was young enough to know and understand the truth, Rosemary had told her that her father is alive and is a billionaire. He is Harry Stanford. After that day, Julia used to visualize how desperate her father would be looking for her and thought of calling him and telling him that she is his daughter. And she believed he would come and fall in love with them all over again. Her dream ended when her mother died, but with the news of her father's demise, she thought she has no family, nothing left now. All the 3 children reached Rose Hill, their old home, where Simon Fitzgerald and Steve Solon were arriving the next morning to discuss the will. The attorney next morning told them that the will be distributed among all of them equally. With this much of money, Tyler thought of a luxurious life with Lee. Kendall thought thought she would pay enough to the blackmailer and get rid of them. And Woody thought of buying his own ponies and getting rid of the waitress wife. But then he thought he can't get rid of her as she was supplying him drugs and he was an addict. After this, the next morning, the Julia Stanford arrives to Rose Hills. Nobody trusted her and a DNA test was suggested. But to everyone's surprise, the coffin of Harry was empty, and so no DNA test could be possible to prove if Julia was his daughter. So basically, the lady wasn't Julia but Margot, a person known by Tyler. He made all this plan. He hired a detective, Timmons, who finally found a fingerprint of Julia from a driving license, which was an exact match of this woman, Margot. Margot was a prisoner basically, and Tyler had made her release to use her later. The same he did with Baker. He used him as a fake detective. Baker was also a prisoner only, but he had made him release on his behalf so that he could use him later. He used him as a fake detective, Frank Timmons. Tyler remembered the incident when 2 years back his father had called him to Boston to check on his servants. And it was then that he had found out that his bodyguard Dmitri was a murderer and wanted, and Russian police were after him. But because of the humiliation, he decided to keep Dmitri so he could get all the information about his father, and Dmitri had agreed. Dmitri used to inform Tyler of everything about his father. It was the trip to the village in France, and Dmitri informed Tyler that his father is calling everywhere and going to make changes to his will. It was then that Tyler thought of killing his father. He thought all that humiliation would go in vain if he changes the will. Him and his siblings will be getting nothing. It was then when he asked Dmitri to kill him, and he killed. So basically, Harry Stanford's death wasn't an accident, but it was pre-planned by his elder son Tyler. Now coming back to the current story, Tyler had arranged this fake Julia to get her part of the share in the will. But then he received a letter from a person named Sally. Sally was basically the real Julia's friend who lived with her, and when she got to know that she is the daughter of billionaire, of course from the news, she decided to send her back to her family so that she could live a luxurious life. After receiving the letter from Sally about Julia, Tyler had sent Baker to kill Julia, the same person he had used as fake detective. But she had already left and Sally was staying there alone. He passed on the news to Tyler and he asked him to follow and kill her on the way. The very moment Clark, the oldest servant of Rose Hills, entered Tyler's room and said, "There is some Julia wants to see you at the door." Tyler let her in and asked every detail about her stay, and then asked her to go back to the hotel and wait for them, as other members were not at the home at that moment. Then he called Baker, gave him all the details and asked to kill her tonight. Baker went to her room in the hotel. He waited in the dark and he heard the crack of the door opening. He was about to kill her with his raised knife, but the light switched on and a group of reporters flooded into the room with her. Gordon Wellman, the night manager of the hotel, had called the press to get some publicity for his hotel, which saved Julia's life basically. Here, Tyler called Fitzgerald and told him that Julia was an imposter and asked them to send her out of state. Fitzgerald sent Steve to the hotel and asked him to do what Tyler had asked. He reached the hotel and asked for proof, to which she said she didn't have any. So he asked her to leave. She agreed and decided to leave. Then he went back to her to get back from the bus stop. Post discussion with Simon, she showed them the gold heart-shaped locket and Simon knew it was the real Julia. The gold heart-shaped locket had photos of Harry and her mother. Now Kendall was shocked to know the truth that Peggy, Woodrow's wife, was supplying drugs to Woodrow with the help of her brother. Kendall then spoke to Peggy and finally asked her to leave her brother. Peggy asked for money in exchange and she was given the asked amount. Kendall gave this news to her brother Woody and his reaction was unexpected. Kendall thought he would be very sad and would cry, but he was actually very happy and thanked his sister. After this, the next day, Kendall had to leave for the Paris fashion show where she received the blackmail letter again. asking for $5 million. She went to Mark's room to use his typewriter, and there she found the broken E in his typewriter. Understanding the whole story as all these blackmail letters had a broken E, she confronted Mark, to which he said she is responsible for all this. She never had time for him. Wherever she went, she was the star, and he used to get sidelined always, which he hated. She finally asked him to get out of her life, to which he agreed and said, I'll keep your secret if you keep mine. And she said nothing. She said nothing but let him go. She called Steve, the law attorney, and said, I have a confession to make when I come back to Boston. She confessed her crime to Steve and told them that she wants to surrender. Now, to give justice to Julia, Steve and Simon tried to find out the whole truth. Steve tried to find out Dimitri, but he was dead. Timon Frank was a different person, and Margot was locked away. As Margot's job was done, the judge Tyler had sent her away. No clue was left, and he was getting hopeless. And then came the police officer Kennedy with the news that they have found Harry's body in a river. Steve came to Rose Hills after all his investigation to tell the family that everything that is happening, Woody and his wife's brother are involved in all these crimes. And when Tyler asked about Julia, he said she is safe and is staying at his home. Tyler was happy that all the blame went to Woody and not to him. Now he just had to remove Julia. He went to his room, took out a revolver, and went straight to Steve's house to kill Julia. There she greeted him and welcomed him inside. He came inside and pulled out the revolver and asked her to come out with him. She asked why he was doing this, and he explained, we went through everything and you cannot take any of the money away from us. Your share will be mine only. I'm going to kill you. And with this, Steve and some police officers came out from a different room. It was Steve's plan to know the truth. Tyler, the judge, said to everyone that he was only trying to fool Julia and nothing else. And as they had no proof against him, they let him go this time. Finally, the will announcement day arrives. The announcement said there are $6 billion assets, but Stanford Enterprises are under $15 billion debt, as his father in his last time put almost everything on bet, which led to the loss. Everyone was shocked. Tyler's dream with living a luxurious life with Lee was shattered now. All that planning, killing his father, all went in vain. Meanwhile, Steve found out about Baker, the fake detective that Tyler had used, and collected all the proofs against Tyler. Now with all the proof against him, Tyler couldn't manipulate the situation this time and decided to go back to Rose Hills for one last time. His request was approved by the authorities with 2 policemen accompanying him. He thought about his dream life with Lee, which was now a dream only, went to his room, took out a revolver and shot himself. After coming back, Woody told every news to Mimi. Mimi was a very kind and decent girl from a very decent family who loved Woodrow Stanford, but he never chose her as he did love her and married the waitress. But now his wife has left, he is free. Mimi requested him to come back to her. He agreed. In the last scene, we can see Steve and Julia decided to marry and stay together forever. Woodrow Stanford was going back to Mimi, and Kendall was chosen as the best woman fashion designer of the year.